Tianjin is one of China's largest cities, with an estimated population of more than 13 million. As the world's 10th largest port by container volume, Tianjin is a gateway for goods going in and out of the capital of Beijing, and is one of the country's biggest automobile shipping ports, processing 40% of China's imported cars. It is also a major commercial port and a base for petrochemicals and other industrial materials. Tianjin Dongjiang Free Trade Port Area Ruihai International Logistics Company Limited was established in December 2011 after the property it was built on was sold in 2010 under the pretense of it being used for an ordinary warehouse. It would quickly become a large-scale transit and distribution center for hazardous materials at Tianjin Port. Their property comprised an area of 46,226.8 meters squared, consisting of an office building, 2 dangerous goods warehouses, a transit warehouse, a yard, and a wastewater collection pool. A 2013 environmental impact assessment concluded that the risk of an accident with most of the warehouse's dangerous and flammable products was within acceptable limits. The company was issued an official license to handle hazardous chemicals from April 2014 to October 2014 and accounted for 70% of the hazardous goods shipments in Tianjin that year. The company did not cease working with dangerous chemicals after the license expired. The storage facility was operating without an official permit between October 2014 and June 2015 when it obtained another license. By August 12, 2015, the company had 70 employees, an annual cargo output of 1 million tons, and an annual operating income of more than 30 million won, or $4.7 million. At 10:50 p.m. on the night of August 12th, over 1,020 Tianjin firefighters, 140 fire trucks, and rescue teams were dispatched to one of Ruihai's warehouses after receiving reports of a fire. Many of the first crews to arrive were contract firemen, mostly young, inexperienced workers hired by the port itself rather than the local government. The first fire brigade to reach the area had been trying to determine the contents of the Ruihai warehouse, all the while spraying water on several containers from which the fire had originated. Unbeknownst to them, however, many of them would not live to understand the true nature of what they were trying to put out.
Whoa! Oh! What the? Film me!
Whoa! Whoa! I think we are dead.
At 11:30 p.m., an explosion equivalent to 3 tons of TNT rang out from the dangerous goods warehouse of the Ruihai logistics facility. It shook the Binhai New Area district, causing many in the nearby residential area to come out to see what was happening. Just 30 seconds later, a second explosion approximately 7 times more powerful than the first ripped through the city of Tianjin. The resulting blast rippled outward for several miles, scorching a logistics park containing thousands of vehicles before surging into residential areas, destroying windows and tearing off doors, launching scores of crumpled shipping containers into neighboring communities with the force of artillery shells, and injuring over 700 people. The blasts were recorded on earthquake monitoring equipment, the first registering at a magnitude of 2.3, and the second registering at 2.9. The fireball rose hundreds of meters into the air, becoming so massive that satellites were able to observe it from orbit. A large area of the port was devastated. Shipping containers were left buckled, bent, and burnt. Row upon row of new cars were reduced to blackened wrecks. Dazed and bloodied victims ran into the streets and fled from the flames, many of them believing that they had either been the victims of a terrible earthquake or an atomic explosion. Hundreds quickly overwhelmed the local hospitals, many of them injured by flying glass, suffering from skull injuries or fractures. All the while, thousands more were forced to live in emergency shelters. Reports of casualties from the event increased over time. The number eventually came up to 165 deaths, including 24 active firefighters from the Public Security Department, 75 firefighters from Tianjin Port, 11 police officers, and 55 employees of Ruihai Logistics, as well as surrounding companies and nearby residents. Some 8 people remained missing, and 798 were injured. By September 12th, a full month after the incident, Chinese authorities ended the search for the remaining 8, 5 of whom were firefighters. This set the final death toll at 173, 104 of which were firefighters, making it the country's worst industrial disaster and the worst loss of life for its first responders since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. There were miracles among the destruction, however. 30 hours after the explosion, rescue teams located a 19-year-old firefighter, Zhao Ti, who had survived the blast with massive injuries. The next day, a 56-year-old man was also miraculously found alive, just 50 meters or 150 feet away from the epicenter, having survived for 3 days in a shipping container. Both were declared in stable condition at the hospital. Further efforts to put out the fires were suspended on orders from the central government. Early on the morning of August 13th, China's President Xi Jinping demanded that authorities make full effort to rescue and treat the injured, and later declared that those responsible should be, quote, severely handled. Li Keqiang, the country's premier, personally visited the site and promised open and transparent information disclosure on the investigation. About 36 hours after the blast, over 200 Chinese military, nuclear, and biochemical materials specialists arrived at Tianjin. Though what the company was holding at the facility was not immediately clear to the government, the resulting inspections at the blast site revealed that 700 tons of sodium cyanide were being stored at the warehouse, 70 times more than the legal limit. Sodium cyanide is a highly toxic chemical with the appearance of a white crystalline powder, typically used in chemical manufacturing, fumigation, and extraction of precious metals. It can be rapidly fatal if inhaled or ingested, as it interferes with the body's ability to use oxygen. Even just a teaspoon of the substance is lethal. According to a report, the fire started in a container on the south side of the warehouse's arrival area. It occurred through a spontaneous ignition of the overly dry nitrocellulose stored within, a flammable compound that overheated due to vaporization of a wetting agent during the hot summer weather. The fire spread, igniting other chemicals, including ammonium nitrate fertilizer stacked nearby. Firefighters had used water in combating the initial fire, which may have led to some being sprayed on stalks of calcium carbide that had also been stored close by, causing a reaction that released the highly flammable gas, acetylene. This would have provided the fuel source for a reaction with the ammonium nitrate, triggering a detonation. The initial acetylene blast could then have detonated the other chemicals stored in neighboring containers, such as the abundantly present sodium cyanide, a chemical that releases the highly poisonous, highly combustible gas hydrogen cyanide when mixed with water. This created the much larger secondary explosion seen 30 seconds later. Despite major discrepancies between the accounts of company management, it was revealed that the Ruihai warehouse was storing some 3,000 tons of hazardous chemicals, including 700 tons of sodium cyanide, 500 tons of potassium nitrate, and 800 tons of ammonium nitrate. The explosion left an enormous 20-foot deep crater that filled with water 2 days after the blast. Sodium cyanide was confirmed to have leaked into the sewer. Authorities sealed off all waterways leading out of the blast zone to curb cyanide contamination, as teams in hazmat suits moved to clean up hazardous debris ahead of an expected weather change. Incoming rain posed the risk of spreading the toxins and creating another dangerous chemical reaction. Authorities switched to spraying 15% hydrogen peroxide to neutralize the sodium cyanide. Immediately after the disaster, air quality emergency monitoring points were set up around the accident site, initially confirming that the air quality was normal. However, at 4 p.m. the next day, police detected high densities of toxic gases within 500 meters of the blast site. Technicians even detected levels of cyanide as much as 356 times the safe level within a 3-kilometer or 1.8-mile radius. At first, there were concerns that the airborne contamination would spread to Beijing. However, the southwest westerly winds of northern China successfully drove it towards the Bohai Sea. Nevertheless, over 6,300 residents in temporary shelters were told to evacuate on August 15th, when the wind changed direction. Authorities ordered a 3-kilometer or 2-mile exclusion zone around the blast. The arrival of rain on August 18th covered the streets of Tianjin with a strange, white foam. Those who came in contact with the rainwater complained of a burning sensation on their face and lips, a stinging sensation on their arms, as well as rashes. Thousands of dead fish were later found on the surface of the River Hai, 6 kilometers from the blast site, adding to fears of environmental contamination. Chinese officials denied that it was linked to the incident, stating that no toxic levels of cyanide had been found in the river during tests. Around 4,000 Hyundai and Kia vehicles were destroyed, as well as 2,750 Volkswagens and 1,500 Renaults. As of December 10, 2015, the direct economic losses stood at 6.8 billion won, or $1 billion. Some 304 buildings, 12,428 commercial vehicles, and 7,533 containers were damaged. Following the completion of the on-site cleanup on September 13th, 1,176 tons of hazardous chemicals and 14,000 tons of cargo were removed. Meanwhile, 50 websites, hundreds of social media pages and accounts were shut down for spreading, quote, Tianjin blast rumors. Some users said their posts about the blast were deleted, and the number of searchable posts on the disaster fluctuated. Even on Tianjin TV, Korean dramas were airing hours after the incident unfolded, as reporters waited for permission to start covering the story. At a hospital hosting many of the injured, a reporter was threatened by security guards to delete the photos he was taking. CNN reporter Will Ripley was even blocked from reporting outside a hospital by bystanders. He Zhaojin of the Beijing News was able to bypass police patrols to observe the disaster zone. He was later forced to delete pictures on his phone and computer after being caught. However, those on his camera survived after he'd hidden the memory card in a pocket on his trousers. The Cyberspace Administration of China, the government agency in charge of internet censorship, issued instructions to media outlets that were then leaked to the public. Among them was the order to use only copy from authoritative departments. Websites and media entities were restricted from privately gathering information, making live broadcasts, or privately posting about the explosions. The developers of Vank Port City, the closest residential complex to the blast site, and consequently the worst affected, said they had been told when they started construction in 2010 that the warehouses only handled common goods. There was never any mention of dangerous chemicals. According to regulations set by the State Administration of Work Safety, facilities over 550 square meters that handle hazardous chemicals must be more than 1 kilometer or 3,200 feet away from public buildings. Vank was only 2,000 feet away, or just 600 meters, one of 3 major residential complexes that the warehouse was illegally in proximity to. The first press conference held to inform the public about the nature of the explosions was chaired by relatively low-ranking officials who, much to the public's infuriation, were unable to give any answers as to what was being stored at the warehouse. On the morning of August 16th, hundreds of residents staged a protest outside the press conference, many demanding that the government buy back their damaged apartments. Families of the missing reservist firefighters also joined. They had been left in the dark about the whereabouts of their loved ones, who were not full-fledged firefighters and had not been accounted for in the official death and injury tolls. Doubts also came to surround a questionnaire issued to 130 people living near the warehouse. It was conducted by environmental authorities as part of an endorsement of Ruihai's plans to handle hazardous chemicals. The poll concluded that most of the respondents supported the project, but residents said they had no knowledge of any questionnaires or of Ruihai's intentions, many of them saying that they would never have given their approval if they had. Owners of more than 9,000 households, out of a total of roughly 17,000 that had been damaged, signed compensation agreements with the local government, who promised them 1.3 times the average house price of their destroyed homes. However, many stated that a lot of them signed the agreements after being threatened with the loss of their jobs by their supervisors at state-owned enterprises. Most worryingly, many said that the compensation would not be enough to purchase comparable apartments in the area. Even more than 3 weeks after the explosions, multiple Tianjin residents were yet to receive compensation for their losses, and some said they were even pressured into dropping their claims. On August 18th, an investigatory team was established under the approval of the State Council, China's top decision-making body. Consisting of 600 officials from varying government agencies, they reviewed thousands of documents and 100,000 hours of surveillance footage. They assigned responsibility for the accident far and wide, pinning the disaster on the negligence or corruption of 123 people, in addition to 49 who had been arrested. These were inclusive of the company chairman, Yu Zhuwei, and the vice chairman, Deng Shizhuan, who stated that they had leveraged their personal relationships with government officials to obtain licenses for the site. Also responsible were multiple government officials in charge of industrial safety, such as Yang Dongliang, the director of the same State Administration of Work Safety that had established the 1-kilometer rule. Formerly Tianjin's vice mayor, in 2012, Mr. Yang had signed an order that loosened up rules for the handling of hazardous chemicals by companies, not all of whom were legally licensed. Judges sentenced 25 government officials and 24 staffers of the companies involved. The most serious sentence was handed to the company chairman, Yu Zhuwei, who was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve after a court found him guilty of bribing port administration officials to obtain a certificate to handle hazardous chemicals at the port. Though such sentences are usually commuted to life in prison after 2 years, Yu said in court that he regretted his decisions and would not appeal. The State Council rolled out a nationwide inspection of all businesses using dangerous chemicals and explosives in the face of mounting recognition that the conditions that led to the explosion exist in cities throughout China. To prevent a similar catastrophe, investigators issued a list of recommendations, including the creation of a national system for monitoring hazardous chemical storage. As for those lost in the fire, the Tianjin government announced plans to build a 24-hectare park on the site of the blast as a monument to the fallen firefighters. However, Chinese social media users reacted to the announcement with derision, questioning the priorities of the local authorities and the feasibility of the plan, suspecting that the site would remain toxic for years.